Well, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to just take about, maybe 5 minutes. Curtis and I can share a little bit of the rearview mirror with everybody. Some of you have more insight than others, but I know Abigail's new to us. Jonathan, I think there's probably some things here that you aren't aware of with regard to the origin of the Outcast network. With that, I'll say let's do the formal introduction because I like this. I like this format. I like being able to introduce people for the God Talk. This is not a TED Talk. TED has nothing on Jesus. And so tonight we have our brother Curtis, who he and Jesus are going to give a little bit of a word around the question, are you an outcast? So Curtis didn't want to do a bio, so I made up a bunch of really funny stuff that I hope embarrasses him. And no, I can't do that, even though I wish I were that creative. Though I will say, Curtis grew up in Maine in the 1900s. You can figure out the rest. He was born into a family of talented musicians and business owners. Industrious in his own right, Curtis, as a younger man, was handy with his hands in the automotive and music industry. And fortunately, he figured out at an early age there was more to life than playing with popular bands. His spiritual journey led him to seminary and later to becoming a successful business owner. He and his wife have been married for over 30 years, and they are proud parents of one daughter that is married and serving the Lord through YWAM in Hawaii. Curtis is currently based in Kansas City, Missouri, and has spent much of the last 20 years being a video scribe doing documentaries and video production for many different well-known ministries and outreach ministries. Curtis's greatest desire in these last days is to fulfill the call that God put in his heart back in 2005 to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth through the internet using virtual reality platform. Please welcome the man behind the scenes, aka Outcast Network Director of All Things Unseen, Curtis Clements, as he presents tonight's God Talk, Are You an Outcast?
Some of you don't know, but I've known John since probably 1974, and we were in high school together, and we were part of the party contingent, and John was pretty much the same back then as a heathen as he is today in terms of openness and in terms of being just a great guy you could talk to about anything. That hasn't changed. That was put in him from the get-go, and that's why I think he and I, as a couple of orphans, found each other as friends, and that's how it started back in the 70s. Well, then I fast forward to 1989, I had finished seminary, and I'd kind of gone back up to Maine because I had spent, several years in Florida, and then went back to Massachusetts to go to school. And I would come up to Maine on the weekends, and I saw John one day at the Dairy Queen up in North Windham, and he came in, and I said to him, "You are a marked man. God's got his hand on you, and you're just not going to be able to resist. It's over." And what was your reaction to that, John? I don't remember.
Bye.
Well, it was one of those crazy prophetic things you just stepped out and did, and hope you were right. But I kind of felt very strong about that, and because I knew we had history, and so. And, so John and I, we kind of kept in touch, and a little here and there, a little there. He came down to Florida to do some insurance adjusting for Hurricane Andrew when we were living down there. And got to connect with him then, and by then he'd gotten saved. So that was really kind of fun, and we kind of, a little here, a little there. So I kind of lost contact with John for 19 years. And in February of 22, we figured it out, right? Yeah, February 22.
February 22, coming up on 2 years.
Yep, so that would be,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was February 23.
February
February
23.
23, right.
Yeah.
I should look at my phone records. Anyway, I'm driving down the road, and the men among us will understand this. You ever go to that nothing zone where there's nothing happening in your head? You're completely on autopilot, just nothing, just driving. And some people look very consternated. Lisa, you look like you're in a sort of a, what's he talking about? Well, anyway, of course, Jonathan's shaking his head, and
You guys have a nothing box.
the nothing box.
Yeah.
And I heard this word, John Cadero, and I go, huh, well, that might be one of three things: myself, the devil, or God. Okay, so I kind of pulled over and I said, well, let's see if this is God, right? Haven't talked to this guy in 20 years, maybe. Well, I don't know. We kind of figured out 20 years later. So I said, well, last known location, Dallas, Texas. So I said, hey, Google, John Cadero, minister of the gospel, Dallas, Texas. And then I got the ministry popped up first thing. Oh, okay. So I called the number and I got a phone. It was a phone pickup message and it was John's voice. So I said, okay. So I left a message. And then about 10 minutes later, the fellow that had run the ministry that John had kind of left with called me back and said, hey, John moved to Maine. And he said, so I said, okay. He said, but here's his telephone number. You can call him. I said, great. And he let me know there's no, problems with the ministry or anything like that. He just, God moved him and his wife, and they're back in Maine. Okay. So then I called Maine, and John, you said something came up on your phone when you were driving with Cynthia,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it was the oddest thing. It said valid caller on the screen. And my wife looks at me and she goes, it's just spam. Just, get rid of it. And I'm like, no, I want to see what a valid caller sounds like. And so I'm like, hello. Yeah, is this John Cadero? Yeah, this is John Cadero. Oh, this is Curtis Clements. And so we just started talking, and my wife and I had just prayed like the morning before,
Hmm.
just going, God, what is it you want us to do? What's the assignment? We had been swimming in these waters for over 2 years at that point of doing a Father's Heart for You podcast and having all of that kind of stale, no, not just stalled out, and spent all this money, equipment, and time, and it's like I don't want to keep banging my head against the wall. So we just said, Lord, send us somebody who, can help us take this vision forward. We believe it's you. And so
Hmm.
when the phone rang and Curtis started, I was like, I don't want to be an opportunist. I don't, because I'll share a little bit of his background here when I do his introduction tonight. But he had a vision that went along with what God had been calling me to. But his vision was actually from 2005. And and so I'll leave that for Curtis to share if you want to right now, Kurt. Just what was it that happened there?
Yeah, in 2005, I was involved. We had built a company that did law enforcement video, and we were running it in tests in Washington, D.C., and had some bad partners, and we had to kind of shut it down. And so I'm flying up to New Jersey to talk with one of the, co-owners, and I get this magazine, like Charisma magazine, and it had an article in there called "The Church of Fools." Okay, and what the United Methodists had done in London is they had an experiment where they actually went online. Now, mind you, this is in 2005, before iPhones, iPads, smartphones. You had flip phones and desktops and laptops. That was it. That was your world,
Dial up.
technologically. So if you were a gamer, you were on a PC or a Mac or you were on a laptop. Okay, that's the world. And what they had done was they got this company that they made this church that was a virtual reality church. You come in and grab an avatar and sit down, and it had 7 or 8 type of moves you could make. You could genuflect and do this and do the sign of the cross because it was a Episcopal, right? And make a long story short, they had 40,000 kids show up for this one of their services, and the services was nothing more than speech bubbles that would just go up like this, a couple phrases at a time. It would take you about 35 minutes to go through what the equivalent of a Microsoft Word page, just one page. And because of that, they had all sorts of, kids, like 40,000. And I felt like the Lord said, I want you to do this. So for the next 20 years, I tried several attempts at it, only to find out that, that's not exactly, I didn't have the ability to pull it off. When I first got my first quote, it was for $1 million just to start the project, back then. And so anyway, so I've had this in the back of my mind. And then so I kind of said to John just yesterday or today, I said, it's kind of like that old Reese's peanut butter commercial, where the guy has a chocolate bar and he runs into somebody that's got a bag of, or a peanut butter opening, and then you got a Reese's peanut butter cup. So John started talking about all the initiatives that he wanted to do electronically and how to do that, with podcasting. We're going to do YouTube, we're going to do this, going to do that. And we've actually built a virtual reality world because we want to take some of what we're doing right here after a good framework is set for people who are really wanting to go out there and leadership into the digital world and start rescuing some of these kids that are caught in the matrix. There's about at least a billion, I said that 1 billion registered kids on all of these gaming platforms that are just, spending their lives in there. And so I said, you know what, we have to go after them. And so that's kind of how we started, John, and that's where we came together. It took 3 weeks or so, and we said, let's try this. So that was really it.
Yeah. Yeah, when he says kids, we're talking about 18 and older. I mean, everybody's a kid to us at this age. So, but I mean, honestly, even those 40,000 that showed up for a online service that took 35 minutes to go through essentially 6 paragraphs, they were all 18 to 30 years old.
Man,
That's
And
right.
they were males,
most
which,
men.
Yeah,
there's a lot of
60%
males
male.
missing in the church. Amen?
Yep. And so it really spoke to them in their world. So,
Yeah.
we have to go to the highways and the byways, we're told, and compel them to come into the Father's house, right? Well, there's a digital side to that in this today's world that we're in. Obviously, look at us right now, This has been, COVID helped accept this type of, a meeting. So, yeah.
Yeah. We had a pastor when we first got to Texas, and he said, if we don't stay in step with the digital era, we're going to lose the young people. We're going to lose the next generation. And so this is a little bit of backtracking to kind of catch up. And this piece of the equation is really, I think, where we need to take this. When I say this, the Outcast Gathering, what we're doing here is about creating a base of those people who are willing to disciple, and in being able to disciple. And that, don't get scared. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to be, certified. All you have to know is Jesus, and all you have to know is enough of His Word to help someone who knows less of the Word than you do. Even better than that is, you need to know the heart. If you know the heart of the Father, then you'll know how to love people, and you'll know how to be humble enough so that you can just walk that road with that person. If you don't know the answer, that's great. You can go find out together. And that's what happened. If you go back and read the book of Acts, kind of bringing everything forward now, I've been studying the book of Acts, and I just get so enthralled, because when you look at it, when the body came to life after Jesus' resurrection was when the Holy Spirit came. And there were 12 disciples that turned into 120 in the upper room. They got lit up, and all they did is they left the room and went out into the public,
Took it with them.
and it blew up. And then what happened next? People just started to share. And what we see a lot is that there's a tremendous opportunity to reach out to people. Kim and I were talking about today that one of the things we've done, several of you have experienced the Reset Workshop. And can you imagine bringing people in to the Reset Workshop, getting them through that process, and then telling them, oh, there's a community over here that you can join of others who you would fit with, that you can interact with, that would understand what it is that you've just gone through. And so there's just a lot of hope to the future. I'm a visionary. Pray for me that I just stay in step with Holy Spirit. Kim is really good. She's reminding me constantly, John, just trust the process. And she smiles because she knows that's one of my favorite things to tell people. Just trust the process. It's easier said than done.
I will give a little testimony about going to church for 45 plus years. I kind of came to a point in about 3 or 4 years ago where, another church where, like I first got kicked out of my first church back in '82 when I got healed in my leg. I had these horrific Charlie horses and cramps because I got hit by a motorcycle at age 14. So I was at a church, and I'd really liked the pastor. We got along well. And I was on staff, actually, 2 years of being saved. And I was working with the kids in children's church. And evangelism explosion, and we had joy explosion night. Everything was an explosion back then. And explosion. This I go into college full time, and so I had these horrific leg cramps, and I ended up getting invited to go to a church where they really worship. They lifted up their hands, and I felt the presence of God was so heavy. I mean, like, wow. I I had to confess every sin, and the next time I went, I said, man, I got to spend an hour in prayer before I go there because I don't want to feel rotten that I've got something in my life that's not right with God. I could go to my other church and fall asleep and feel great. But this other one was like in the afternoon. So the guy said, the pastor said, hey, does anybody need anything wrong in your body? Why don't you come on up and get some prayer? I said, what have I got to lose? So I went up to the front and I sat down on this old pew, this old Pentecostal church, right? They met in the afternoon. And I put my back right against the thing. And he said, all right, lift up your legs. He lifted up my legs and he put his hands under my legs. And I could see that one of my, legs was different, right? So he started praying for me. And I watched with my own eyes and I felt like something warm went over my calf. Then I felt like it turned into rubber taffy, if I can explain that experience. And I watched without doing anything that other leg creep like this and grow probably about a half inch before my very eyes. And I felt it. I felt the oil. It was like just this beautiful warm oil over my calf. And I says, wow. And that was a creative miracle. That's the only one I've ever seen that dramatic in my entire life. I've not been up to Africa and been on big mission trips out there where you see that kind of common stuff, or some churches where they really have some great healing ministries. But for me, that was a real creative miracle. And the pain stopped. I stopped having that. So I said, wow, I got to go tell the pastor about this. He needs to know about this. This is real cool. And so I did, and we went out to dinner, and we had a good relationship. And so I told him, and I said, hey, Steve, I went to this church, and my leg got healed. I said, I've watched it grow before my very eyes, and I felt it when they prayed over me. And he says, well, He said, I've had this conversation 100 times. I said, yeah. And he said, we're not going in that direction in this church. Now, I'm just not going to do it. And he said, we're not going to speak in tongues. We're not going to pray for sick, or we'll pray, but we're not going there. And you're doing children's church and you're doing bus ministry. I was kind of a religious workaholic back then, still am to some degrees, but not necessarily all religion. And he said, and you're doing bus ministry, you're doing all this stuff. And so I'm going to have to ask you to step down and find yourself a fellowship that where you need to be part of something like that. And inwardly I'm saying yes, because I wanted to leave that church, but only 2 years in the Lord, I didn't feel that I could just go make a decision like that quite on my own. I had to have God step in because I'd stay there until he told me to do otherwise, because he did move me there. And a lot of good things happened there. Lots of good stuff happened there. And so when the pastor said that, I was just elated because I had my out and I had my ticket out of there. And so that was my first Outcast experience. And having gone to church for 40 plus years, I've read several books on the subject where I felt like, okay, there's only two people here practicing their spiritual gift. Everyone else is just sort of sitting there, right? And that would be the pastor, he's doing the word, and that would be, of course, the music leader, worship leader, although I think it's all worship. I don't like to use worship and tie it just to music. And so I said, okay, So then last week I opined to John because I take the Zoom calls and I edit them. And I looked at the whole timeline from what happened when he started recording till the last dismissal of the Zoom room and a few comments, and then we were out, okay? 60%, a whopping 60% of what we did was what I call dialogical, meaning it was two-way. There was the God talks, which took about 25%, 5% for the worship and music. And then the rest of the 60% had to do with, if I got my math wrong, but about 60% had to do with us interacting with one another. And I realized that the church is like all these people here, but they're kind of like that. When we take this and turn it into a experience where we listen and we talk, we share, we pray, this happens and the circuits get thrown and the power hits and life gets changed. And I felt that, you know what, there came a point where our last church we were in, my wife was doing worship and I was doing this, and, we were in a situation, we started prophesying and the guy just didn't like it, the pastor, and he started getting passive aggressive on stuff. And so finally he had, you could tell he didn't want us there. And I said, you know what, I am done with Stadium Church, where they have one person doing all the decisions and one person doing all the music, and the rest of us just have to kind of sit there and go along and pay our tithe and build a building that sits empty for, 95% of the time. And I said, that's it, I'm done. And something clicked in me, and I said, you know what, if I can't have all fellowship and have real ecclesia, and I can go into the whole history of how we got into this lecturing type of mode with an audience type thing. It's quite a long study in and of itself, but I won't get into that now. So to me, this is a fulfillment of not only the vision that has to do with where we're going in terms of going after some of the kids, and that might be something that I just have a small team as I work with John on that, versus real fellowship, real people, real dialogue, real care, real prayer. And like I said, I cannot just have to shout out to Robin and both Charlotte for their transparency and the type of ministry that I received listening to their stories. And of course I know Lisa, and I'm learning to know Jonathan and the Lindy family, and of course Kim and Abigail. I don't know, but hi Abigail. And so
Hi.
that's kind of the story where I'm at. And I'm all for any expression of Christianity that people can grow in and that they're working in. But as for me, that's kind of where I have evolved to. And then I looked at the, all of the paradigms in the 1 Corinthians 14, where it says, when you come together, each one of you has a song, a psalm, a hymn, a teaching. And so you don't really see the bishop model of the same lecturer each week. That's kind of unknown in the first century. And even Paul, when he, placed elders, sometimes the elders wouldn't be placed for like 3 years. So if something organically happened within the congregation that rose the people up. And then, of course, if you're free not to have these buildings, we can, really make the dollar stretch and start giving to things that really are effective rather than, and look at what's happening in this mega church movement. I mean, every week you find out some other debacle going on, or some other pastors, 3 or 4 concubines or little boys. It's just awful right now what's happening. And I think that part of it has to do, and a component in my estimation, has to do with the very type of how we do church that really doesn't find its genesis in the New Testament, nor in the early church. So that's kind of the hill I'm on. And but I also don't want to curse anything that God's really blessing. It's some wonderful churches that have that model of, the senior pastor, and he's the one that makes the decisions, and you have a worship leader or a couple or whatever. And because great things can happen there too. But for me, I'm going in a different direction. So that's it.
No, it's good. Yeah, I definitely want to emphasize that as well. We are not here to cast aspersions on those churches that are functioning as they're called to, because I believe there's many parts to one body, and I think that there's different levels of opportunity and insight and training and teaching and development that can take place within the different churches that are out there. I think I'm going to guess that several of us here have attended different churches over the years, and that has been at the leading of the Lord to take and move on to different places where we've found that we had different needs that were not going to get met where we were. And so we hope to complement, we hope to take and equip the body by what we do with the Outcast Network. This is his. This is not ours. And I really hope it will be a legacy that we all get to leave behind, so that others will have something to stand on that actually puts them in a place where the relationship goes so deep and so wide and so high that others they can't do anything but impact more people for God's glory.
Well, no, really, honestly, about being an outcast, that was why I started my story with, being kicked out, asked to leave. And I was involved in a lot of ministry at that church. And it was a good sized church down in South Florida.
Yeah.
And like I say, I had a good relationship with the pastor. had a great relationship when I left, and I didn't have any animosity. I just felt bad for the guy that he was just so blind to spiritual, the gifts of the Spirit.
Yeah.
And they were what would, some people call a cessationalist. Now, those things ended with the apostles. When John died on the island of Patmos, that was the end of the Holy Spirit, at least in terms of anything other than ethical renewal, You know
Wow.
what I'm saying? So then I've had, other experiences through that. So I guess to me, it's when I get around a lot of folks that, have had some rough stuff in their background like I have, I feel at home because I'm around people that, in my opinion, that they know their vulnerabilities and they know their weak spots and they know things that they've had to come through. And I'm telling you, I've done a lot of street evangelism. My favorite people to be around are the ex-cons that have done time because they have gotten so thoroughly changed. One of my best guys, if I do video work, is a guy named Bill Corum, who's 81 years old, part of the Kansas City, underworld up until 1982. He was a mob enforcer, a hitman. He did it all, and now he's got some of the greatest fruit of 39 years of prison ministry in Kansas and Missouri and all over the United States, for that matter. Spoken over, I don't know, 500 prisons and multiple times, and he gets like 200 letters a week. Guys, thank him for his book called The Ultimate Pardon. They don't commit suicide. He gets those letters every week. And he'll probably come on and give us a God talk if I ask him. I know he will.
Oh
And
yeah.
so he tells me stories about what Kansas City underworld was like and what he used to do. And not in a braggadocious manner. He just was so thankful that God has thoroughly saved him.
Yeah.
And if you don't know the power of the cross, you'll certainly see it in Bill Corum if you get him to come on. And about everyone that I've heard on this, stories, and hearing Robin and Charlotte's story. Of course, I got listened to Charlotte's story back in October of 23 when we came down and did the soak. And got to know Lisa because Lisa was doing a little bit with us at the beginning, and she'll interject back in with some of the things. And so I've really seen some of the stories, and I say, wow, I'm in good company because I'm still got so many things that I got to change in my life still to this day, but we all kind of hang together. And John and I have some good serious talks, as friends that, go back to 1974. So that would give us what, brother, 50 years this year we've known each other at least.
Scary to think of it that way, but
Yeah.
I was never that good at math. I don't want to be right now. Thank you.